Hey, good evening, everybody. It's Ray Davis with the Affirmation Spot and Stay Home and Come With Me. We're here for another episode of Excursions in the Mind. And tonight we're going to talk about a hero, a very special hero, you. And we're going to talk about Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. So tonight we're going to talk about a metaphor that's been used in stories throughout history that also is a great metaphor for our life. And we're going to talk about what the hero's journey is, what it means, how it came about, and also how you can apply it in your life. So with that, let's get started. So what we're going to cover tonight, as I said, we're going to talk about what the origin of the hero's journey is, what the hero's journey is. There's been some societal impacts of this idea and what some of those are. We're going to talk about applying the hero's journey to your life. And we're going to end with characteristics of the hero within. So last week we did some exercises and things like that. This is more presentation tonight, but I hope you're going to take some tools away from this that you can use and apply in your life this coming week. So let's get started. So what is the origin of the hero's journey? So it isn't really necessarily a concept that anyone made up. What it was is something that someone recognized. So a man named Joseph Campbell, who was one of the great mythologists of the 20th century, back in the 1930s, he started studying all the world religions and philosophies and things like that. And he was looking for things that matched up between the different religions. And what's really interesting about that time frame is you have to remember in the 20s and 30s, this is the time when a lot of the things we now know about, ancient Egypt were just coming into the general knowledge. Ancient Sumeria, we were doing a lot of archaeological digs in those areas, learning about all these cultures and learning things that we didn't ever know before. And Campbell was someone who realized that this was an opportunity to compare these different religions, maybe for the first time in history, and understand if there were some connections between them. And so he learned several languages, including Sanskrit, which for those of you who don't know, Sanskrit is kind of like Latin in the West. It's a dead language now in India. It was the ancient language of India, but he learned Sanskrit so that he could read the ancient Hindu and Buddhist texts and really understand what they were in their original language. So that's pretty impressive. But Campbell himself was influenced by one of the most famous psychoanalysts of the time. You've probably all heard of Carl Jung. So he, along with Sigmund Freud, were kind of the fathers of modern psychoanalysis. They had very, very different ideas of what that was all about. And Jung had this idea of something called the collective unconscious. And this was something that influenced Campbell in his work very much, because what Jung said is that basically our unconscious, or subconscious as I prefer to call it, really has kind of these imprints that all human beings have in common across culture, everywhere in the world, across time. Just being human beings, we have certain things that we recognize innately. And he called them archetypes, and he named a number of these, and they're kind of the hero and the villain, and there's just a bunch of these that he named off. And what Campbell saw was an idea here that could help tie together what he was seeing in all the mythologies he was reading. He was wondering, how could all these mythologies across space and time have some of these very common factors all in common? And he grabbed it on this idea that Jung had of the archetypes and decided that that must be what was creating really the same pattern of stories throughout cultures. So if you go into, ancient Greece, or even some of the modern religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, you see some very similar motifs, some very similar story patterns. And eventually, after Campbell kind of brought this to the fore, it really kind of became common knowledge that this was a way that people had told stories for thousands of years. And you'll see this pattern that we're going to talk about tonight in many movies that you see, whether you're talking about things like The Matrix, or you're talking about things like Star Wars. Just this pattern, it goes throughout all of these things. And Campbell was the first one that recognized it. And he wrote a book in 1949 called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And he basically was sharing this research with the world for the first time. And as I said, this was not common knowledge the way it is today. Today you can Google these things and you can study all the texts from all these different parts of the world. But in that time, there was no one who had really compiled this and looked for these similarities. And that's what this book did. So it kind of had two lives. It was a bestseller in 1949 when it was released. And then when the 60s came along, people saw this, this pattern that was talked about in the hero's journey was a great metaphor for living the life that you wanted to live. And of course, in the 60s, that was becoming a big deal. We were becoming very individualistic. There was an idea that everyone has their own path. Campbell believed that very strongly. Despite the pattern, he believed that we all had to go on our own journey. And we'll talk about that some tonight. But I mentioned Star Wars a moment ago, and George Lucas came out, I think it was in the 80s, and said that Campbell had been a huge influence on him when he was developing Star Wars, and that he had consciously tried to make the Star Wars story fit the hero's journey. So really interesting. But you see this in a lot of movies, even romantic comedies. You always, start with a story, you go into kind of this other situation, then you come back around to the end. And so we'll talk about here in a second how all that works. So what is the monomyth, or the hero's journey? The monomyth is kind of the general term for it. The hero's journey is kind of the term that Campbell gave it. So there are really three key elements to the hero's journey. There's separation, initiation, and return. And there are a number of steps in each of those parts of the process that make up the journey. So Campbell originally came up with a list of 21 items that were part of this journey. Later on, he reduced it down to 17, and then various people have taken it for a number of different reasons and simplified it down further, saying, well, those steps can kind of fit together. So tonight, we're going to kind of look at a simplified version of this, which I think is a little easier to apply maybe than Campbell's original formulation of this. Another thing to notice on this, if you can look at the graphic on the screen, is that you have two worlds that are involved in this process. You have the ordinary world. That's kind of our everyday life. So if you saw The Matrix, think Neo sitting in his cube, right? He was living in a world that was, normal, like we all know the world to be. And then there was this other world. And, when he got initiated and went into that process, he became aware of this whole other world that existed. And that's very common in the hero's journey. Again, across time and space, this has been a common theme for heroes. So let's kind of go through the steps really quickly. I want to spend most of the time tonight going through how you can apply this in your life, because I think that's the most important thing. So we start, the first step in the journey is the status quo. So that's, again, Neo sitting in his cube in the normal world. That's Luke Skywalker before, Obi-Wan Kenobi comes and says, hey, you've got to go on this journey. You're living kind of in the normal world that we're all used to. It's ordinary, it's kind of boring. A lot of times the hero has this inkling sort of that, something isn't right, but they're not quite sure what it is. And then they get what's called the call to adventure. And that's where some figure comes along and says, hey, there's a lot more you don't know about here. So that could be, Morpheus in The Matrix. That could be Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, you just see these throughout. And again, in a lot of the world's religions and philosophies, you also see this. You see that the hero is initiated by someone that comes to him and says, hey, there's this whole other world going on, and you need to do something about that to change this world. And then you see that after that, the person will get like supernatural aid. So usually either a skill, a gift, or something that's given to them by the mentor that helps them prepare for the journey, prepare for this mission, so to speak. And that aid kind of continues throughout the whole process. Once the hero kind of initiates on this journey, the hero is getting that help, because there's kind of this sense that the universe wants the hero to succeed, to change the world. And so that help kind of continues throughout the process. Then we get to step 3, which is where it's called the crossing the threshold. And this is where you cross out of the ordinary world and into the other world, out of the cube world and into the Matrix, out of the world that Luke Skywalker knew before and into this world where there's all this stuff going on that he never knew about. And at this point, the hero reaches a point of no return. I should have mentioned at the call to adventure, a lot of times the hero will reject at first the call. And usually what happens in most stories, one of two things: either the person kind of goes back to their normal life and they never really become that hero and it kind of ends there, or they refuse and they're given some sort of a punishment or an encouragement to move forward with the process. And so that's something that always happens. But once they get to this crossing the threshold piece, there's no turning back. They're going into the journey. And one of the oldest stories, one of my favorites, is the story of Inanna, who was a Sumerian goddess who went to the underworld. And you see the same story in Egypt with Isis after Osiris dies. She goes into the underworld to save him. This is a very old story. And this idea of the hero going into the underworld is a big part of this. And by the underworld, you could mean hell too. So, I mean, metaphorically, you could even say that, like, when Jesus died on the cross and he went to hell for 3 days, you know, and did that, he was kind of crossing that threshold too and going into the underworld. And you see this story in myth after myth after myth after myth after myth. Then the person gets to what's called the road of trials. And this is kind of where they start meeting the friends, the companions. They're going to help them through the journey. They may meet a mentor like Yoda. So you remember Obi-Wan Kenobi was the one that called Luke to the journey, but the mentor was really Yoda. Remember, Luke wound up with Yoda teaching him, and that's kind of where we got the "there is no try" type of thing. Because at this point, you know, the hero is kind of taken on this journey, and they've maybe been given some special powers or some knowledge, but they still haven't really trained for the situation yet. They're going to go through some sort of a training, some sort of an initiation where they're going to train, and they're going to fail, and they have to overcome that failure in order for them to face what's coming down the road. So in the road of trials, usually there's some events that happen, they meet their friends that are going to help them, and they get involved with the mentor. Then we reach the part that's called the approach. And the approach is basically we're getting to the point where we're getting ready to go into the challenge that the hero is going to face in this journey. And the hero is going through a process that could still include the training and could include other things that basically is preparing them to take on, you know, the challenge that they're going to face in completing the journey. Then we get to the ordeal. Sometimes this is called the belly of the whale. It's kind of rock bottom. It's the, you know, the underworld. All seems lost, and this is where the villain or the opponent or whatever the hero is going to have to battle to succeed in this mission, in this journey, meets them. So if we're using, again, the Star Wars metaphor, this is when Luke meets Darth Vader, and he meets him. There's usually some sort of a confrontation, and the hero has to apply everything they've learned thus far in the journey, from the special power they got, maybe, to the training they've been through. It's all been leading to this moment where they're going to face down with the opponent. Hopefully the hero wins that. In most cases they do. You don't have a very good story in a movie if they don't, and you don't have a very good myth either if they don't, but occasionally the hero fails. If the hero is successful in defeating the adversary, then they move on to the reward stage. So there was some reward often promised, either something for the hero themselves or some greater good for the world that was going to come of them going on this journey to begin with. And so this is the point where they take the reward. So this is, you know, you go to different mythologies where, you know, you're talking about stealing the fire of heaven, right? There's a number of mythologies around that. Thor stole the fire of heaven for humanity. This is where he's kind of escaping with the reward. So he's got the reward. Then it turns into the magic flight, right? Now he's being chased because, you know, the gods aren't giving up their secrets that easily, and they're going to chase him and try to get that back from him. Basically, he escapes, the hero does, and gets to what's called the return. And the return now is when you're basically, you've got the elixir, you're ready to go back to the other world, you've kind of escaped the immediate danger. And this is where you hit resurrection. So resurrection is kind of also sometimes called the other crossing of the threshold. This is where you go back into the ordinary world again, out of the special world, and you bring what Campbell called the elixir. That could be the reward, that could be any boon that you got from this whole process that you're bringing back to the world. If you look at like Buddhism, for instance, right? The Buddha went through this process and he attained this enlightenment. And he had this moment of choice too at this point. He thought about maybe not bringing that enlightenment back to humankind because he was afraid that they wouldn't understand it. And there was an intervention in that particular story by one of the gods that came to him and said, no, you have to do this. Not only do human beings need you to do this, but the gods need you to do this as well. And so he went back into the world, kind of resurrected metaphorically into the world. And then we have resolution, right? So the hero has gone through their entire journey. They've conquered the evil. They've come back with the elixir, with the boon, with the benefit for the world, and all is well. And then we move back into what's called a new status quo. So sort of the process starts all over again. And when we talk about how this applies to our lives, this is really true about our lives. We don't go through this journey just one time in our life. We may go through this journey many times in our life. There may be some that are more memorable than others, some that we really hit all these steps and it really felt like we were going through this journey. And sometimes it's more quick, but we're going to talk about that here in a second and how this can apply to your life. Let's talk really briefly about some examples. So if we think about movie examples, right? Another famous one is, of course, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Dorothy's wishing for something different. You know, she doesn't like the way the ordinary world is. And she says, only if I could, you know, only if I could get into this other world and see this other world. And so the tornado comes in, you know, everything goes on and she winds up in Oz through this whole process. Luke's Katniss Games movies. Again, she was kind of a reluctant hero, right? She didn't sign up for this necessarily, but when they picked her sister to play in the Hunger Games, she signed up to take that and winds up going on this whole hero's journey. And I would say even Forrest Gump, right? I mean, Forrest Gump definitely goes through the hero's journey in his movie, you know, starting from a place of someone that you wouldn't necessarily expect much of, and he does all this stuff and he has this amazing life and he's kind of going on the hero's journey. Some real world examples, and I would say that all of us are really real world examples, but some that you might remember from history, like Jackie Robinson, right? I mean, coming from where he came from, becoming the first African-American major leaguer, you know, quite a hero's journey. Mahatma Gandhi was just a lowly attorney, you know, not famous or anything like that, and just really decided to stand up to the world's most powerful empire and kind of went on this journey. Oprah Winfrey, you know, again, coming from a lot of poverty to building a media empire and being probably one of the most trusted voices in our country. Teddy Roosevelt, you know, was very, very sickly as a child and had to overcome a lot of this stuff and kind of went through a hero's journey on his way to becoming the president of the United States. So again, I would say a big fat U right in the middle of this too, because every one of us is a hero. These are just some examples that might kind of resonate with you that have happened in the real world. So there have been some criticisms of the monomyth. You know, when Campbell first put this together back in the 40s, it was a very different world then. And some of his ideas have come under some fire since then for various reasons. And some of these are kind of legitimate. And I think the theory overall, the idea of it has kind of modified even since Campbell's death to try to account for some of these. One is that the hero's journey is too male-centric. I mean, the whole idea of a hero, right? King Arthur or, you know, Thor or whatever, they're almost always male figures. And that became kind of a criticism of this, this journey. So back in the late 80s, early 90s, there were a couple of writers, and I'll give you their names. One is Maureen Murdock. She was a practicing psychologist, and she actually wrote a book called The Heroine's Journey, where she took Campbell's general idea and basically put together what would be the feminine version of the journey. And there were a couple other writers, I forget, Victoria Lynn Schmidt was the other one. She also wrote a similar book talking about the heroine's journey. So if you're interested in kind of pursuing that, do. Since then, you know, we have a lot of different ideas now in the modern world about gender and things like that. And there's other people who are looking for heroes that match up with them. And I think there's other works probably out there that would kind of try to set the hero up as someone in that framework. So something to be looking for. The general idea remains the same though, right? It's a human being going through this tough cycle of events to achieve a reward and better the world somehow and better themselves. That's kind of the central theme, regardless of whether or not it's the heroine's journey or the hero's journey. Another criticism is it was too Eurocentric. I think this one's actually a little bit unfair, although it's true that Campbell, of course, was an American and very focused on European way of looking at the world. He also spent a lot of time in India. He learned Sanskrit. I mean, so he could read the ancient Hindu texts and the ancient Buddhist texts in the original language. Same with Japanese, I believe he learned, so he could understand Zen at that level. I think that he really did try to incorporate and not just look for just, you know, Eurocentric ideas in this process. I think he was looking for universal principles that he saw in the whole process. And there's a really famous interaction between he and Martin Buber, who was a famous theologian back contemporary of Campbell's. And Buber was doing a conference and Campbell was in the audience. And Buber was a very strong, came from a very strong Christian perspective in his theology. And he was talking about the story, the mythological story, or the story of Isaac and Abraham, right? Where Abraham is asked to take Isaac out into the wilderness and kill him to show his loyalty or his faith in God. And of course, God stops him at the last minute. And Buber was kind of praising that story, and then kind of went into something about Hinduism, was kind of criticizing it. And Campbell raised his hand and said, oh, wait a minute, it's the same story, and you're kind of criticizing one and extolling the other. And he says, well, you don't mean to compare our ideas to their ideas. And Campbell very famously said, well, that's what I do. I'm a comparative mythologist. So Campbell was very much about comparing all these different ideas. Again, we've learned a lot more since he passed away in the 80s, a lot more information about a lot of these cultures. So there's certainly more that can be fed into this today. But again, the central idea of what this is about from a human standpoint, I think, remains true. As far as a literary device, this has become kind of trite. In fact, you'll see now, if someone tries to write according to this formula, which is hard not to do, honestly. Some of you may know I've written a novel, and my book kind of follows the hero's journey a little bit from my main character, Maria. And it's kind of hard not to write this, because these are really common human things that happen in our existence. And again, getting back to what Jung said, these are archetypes that we're all dealing with in our heads. And it's hard to get away from that, but Hollywood's trying to get away from that, because it almost became too formulaic, and they're looking for movies that really tell a story in a different way. It's not to say that you still won't see a lot of elements of the hero's journey. It's just they kind of became a thing where everybody was doing it, and they wanted some change. So you're seeing some of that in the movies. And then there's kind of a nebulous criticism that it's too new agey. I don't really think that what Campbell talked about was that. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing either, but certainly his principles in this hero's journey have been adopted by a lot of people who talk about new age ideas and new ideas and things like that. I think it's very applicable to a lot of areas of our lives. And so it's not really surprising, I don't think, that a lot of people who are in self-help or in personal development would grab onto this idea, because it's a very useful one, as we're going to see here in a minute. So let's get into how we apply this in our lives. So I'm going to do this by just talking about some general points about the hero's journey, and then we'll talk about kind of how we apply them. So you are a hero in your own story, and so is everyone else you meet. Now, this is a hard one to get. For a lot of people, it's hard to even acknowledge that they are the hero in their own story. That seems kind of egoic, or seems kind of, kind of being full of yourself. It's sometimes even harder to see other people, right? That means everybody. That means the guy that cut you off in traffic. That means the mother that didn't treat you right when you were a child. All those people are all on this hero's journey together. Now, everyone has their own journey. Everyone has their own thing, but it's important to remember, and this is kind of, I don't know if a lot of you may not even know this, but in the East, when they bow and they do this, they press their hands together. Or Namaste, you'll hear that word a lot. Basically what it is, it says, I'm bowing to the divine in you. I'm bowing to the Buddha in you. And that's a reminder in a lot of Eastern cultures of the fact that, that divine, that Godhead, a piece of God, whatever, it kind of lives within us. And this is the same idea here, that we are all heroes on this journey. And it's really important to remember. So you can see this quote here. Again, last week I warned you that I do a lot of quotes. The hero you're waiting for is waiting for you in the mirror. And I really believe that. I think the hero, a lot of times we're looking for heroes on the sports field. We're looking for heroes in the political scene. We're looking for heroes elsewhere in life. And certainly there are people that do fill that role for us. They're kind of that mentor, right? The Obi-Wan Kenobi or the Yoda, those kind of figures. There's nothing wrong with that, but we need to remember that we are the hero. We're the hero of our own story. And as we go through the hero's journey in our life, it's really important to remember that. So the second thing is that you have a purpose and it's bigger than you. Now, this is not to say that our own aspirations and goals and things are not important. In the coming weeks and months, as we get more into this show, we're going to talk about a lot of how to manifest things for ourselves in our own lives. But this idea of going on our hero's journey, of accepting this mission, so to speak, and it's something that we're all on, is something that reminds us that there are things that are bigger than us. The hero often starts the journey thinking they're going to get something for themselves, and it comes back understanding that what they really got was a better them and something that can make the world better. And so the hero's journey is one that helps us remember that there is a bigger purpose than just our day-to-day lives and our immediate goals and aspirations, and that we're all here to have an effect on the world in that way. And the hero's journey, really embodying that in our lives and taking on those challenges and answering those calls to adventure, is one way that we can do that. Another quote down here by Einstein that's kind of related to this one: anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new. When we go on the hero's journey, there's this fear, right, that we're going to mess up, that we're not going to know how to do it. That's too hard. I could never be that person. And the fact is we do have this hero within us. And it's just getting over that fear of trying something new, whether it's you want to start a business, you want to write a book, you know, you want to just make the world a better place, but you think, who am I to do that? You know, I could never do that. You have to believe that you have this in you. We all do. And Einstein's talking about here that you need to get over. One of the biggest obstacles is this fear that you're going to make a mistake. We were 18 minutes late starting tonight. That was a mistake that I made. I make them every single day. I'll bet you do too. And in things that we're used to doing all day in our lives, it doesn't bother us so much, but when we're trying something new or big, it does. So don't let the size of this scare you. Don't let the idea of making a mistake scare you. You have this hero, you have this bigger purpose, and it's something that can really make a difference in your life if you'll listen to that call. Then Campbell was famous for saying, follow your bliss. And actually the full quote, although there were several variations of this, was follow your bliss and doors will open where there would not have been doors and where there wouldn't be a door for anyone else. And this is this idea that we are all on an individualized journey as well. Although we are all on this big journey together, I think we have understood that more in 2020 maybe than ever before, that the 7.5 billion people here on the earth are all kind of linked and connected. And even beyond that, we're connected with the other life and everything going on here on the planet. But we are also all on our individual journey. And Campbell encouraged people to follow their bliss, to really find out where their passion lies, where their purpose lies, and not be afraid to follow that. And he was very cognizant. If you go and watch any of his talks, you can find a lot of them on YouTube even today. He's really cognizant of the fact that you're going to have to overcome some barriers to do this. There's kind of the society says barrier, right? And it's hard to go against the conventions and things like that. But sometimes to follow your bliss, to follow this bigger vision, you have to do that. And you have to be willing to set aside all the shoulds sometimes and really follow this. The next one is life's an adventure, but choosing it is a choice. So this is kind of that moment, right, in the Matrix where Neo is sitting across from Morpheus, and Morpheus pulls out the two pills, right? And he says, you take the blue pill, the story ends here. You wake up in your bed and you believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. This is kind of the crossing the threshold step, right? Our life is an adventure. If we just sit in the cubicle our whole life, if we want to write a book and we never write it, if we want to start a business and we never start it, if we want to sing songs and we never sing them, our life's just going to kind of go along like this. And that's not really who we're here to be. We are heroes. We are heroes on a journey. And that kind of works on two different levels too, I didn't mention before. Not only are we a hero in this life on this journey, but just being here in this life is very likely part of a bigger journey that we're on. You know, whether you believe we're here once or we're here multiple times, in either case, this is kind of an adventure. This is like summer at the camp, right? Coming to Earth and experiencing, you know, sun on your face and gravity and stress and love and passion and all these things. I mean, looked at in one way, this is all kind of a journey already. And then within that journey, going on these journeys individually in our lives, pursuing our bliss, really becomes a choice that we have. So we always have this choice, right? We can take the blue pill or we can take the red pill. And we have these opportunities come up all the time. There's calls to adventure all the time in our lives. And, you know, we're not going to take every single one. I mean, you know, there's certain things that maybe don't vibe with us. There's certain things that we don't have time for. But for the important ones, you know, I do recommend maybe that you try taking the red pill and believing in yourself and going down that road. The next one is the adventure without is an adventure within. And this is kind of the metaphysical part of this, right? So, and the quote here, this is a new quote to me that I found in doing my research for this presentation, and I really like it. It's unravel my magic carpet, shake the gold dust from my trips, to the sun and take it for a spin to the center of the universe within. That's by Curtis Tyrone Jones. And that's so true. You know, the further out we go, the further in we go. And that's true of the hero's journey. The hero's journey is not just an external adventure, it's an adventure inside. In fact, every step on that process could really be looked at as a psychological, having a psychological aspect to it, a spiritual aspect to it, if you like. And you may remember the scene in Star Wars, right? When Luke cuts off Darth Vader's head, and what does he see? He sees his own face. Now, that was certainly George Lucas trying to play into the hero's journey a little bit, but the point is Luke wasn't destroying evil out in the world. He was destroying the evil and the negativity in himself when he did that. That's kind of the message there. So even though it feels like an adventure out here when we go on one of these adventures, the truth is it's really about us growing in here. You'll face challenges, but you'll have help too. So the quote for this is, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And the part of this quote that almost never gets requoted is, when the student is truly ready, the teacher will disappear. If you remember the Star Wars scenario again, Obi-Wan shows up again later in the movie, right, when Luke needs him. You think about, Han Solo and Princess Leia and all of Luke's friends that helped him in this process. The two robots, they're escaping my mind right now, I'm talking too fast, but all of them were there and had special talents and gifts that helped Luke along the journey. So there is help in this. If you take that first step, it's going to be scary, but just know that the universe has help waiting for you on this journey, on this hero's journey that you're going to go on. So whether it's, again, writing a book, you're going to have the experts show up right when you need them to help you. Now, you may have to seek them out, but you're going to find the people that will help you and that are willing to help you. So just keep that in mind when you go on the journey. The help is going to be there. There is a reward beyond the danger. So Campbell, again, says the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. It's kind of the paradox, right? The fear, the deepest fear within us, the thing that holds us back the most, is really where the treasure lies. And that's what the whole hero's journey is about. It's about getting through all of these internal negatives and bettering ourselves so that we can take this reward for ourselves and for the world in return with it. And it's that cave that we're most afraid to go in that stops us. Whatever it is with that big dream you've got, think about that. Whatever it is that's holding you back, that's your cave. And that's where your treasure lies. That's like the guardian for your treasures, that fear of whatever it is that's keeping you from following that big dream, from following your bliss. So remember, there is reward beyond the danger, and the reward is worth it if you're willing to go through the guardians at the gate of that cave. Choosing the adventure helps you make your dent. And this is a reference, of course, to Steve Jobs' famous quote about making a dent in the universe, that we're all here to make a dent in the universe. And I really believe that. And this hero's journey, this metaphor for our lives, this process that we can go through to weed out kind of the negatives in us and bring us to a higher place and make us a better citizen in the world, make us a better contributor in the world, is an adventure that we choose, and that we choose every day in some ways. And that's how we're going to make our dent. It's by going into that cave and overcoming those fears and going for that reward. It's by taking on the adversary. It's by really just enjoying the whole experience and getting through the experience to get to that reward, to where you can make the dent that you want to make in the universe. And we have a quote here, Harriet Tubman: "You have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach the stars, to change the world." Every one of us do. These aren't just words. These are really powerful ideas. And I hope that you will take away with you tonight this idea that you are a hero on a journey already. Even before you knew about this tonight, you were. And now you're going to start noticing those calls to adventure in your life. And you do have within you what it takes to get through the journey and get to your goal. And finally, the adventure is a cycle, and it never really ends. And I've alluded to this a couple of times tonight. You're going to face this cycle many, many times in your life. Now, there might be some that are deeper and more profound than others. There might be some that take years or decades to go through. There might be others that take 3 weeks to go through. But there's a cycle. this is a cycle that we use over and over again. And really, it's not even something we use. It's something that will appear in our lives as we kind of go down the road and start choosing these calls to adventure. They're going to keep coming, and we're going to see this cycle in our lives and over and over again. And pretty soon you're going to start to see, oh, it's that step again. This is the part where the hard part comes and the challenges come and I have to overcome them. It's okay. I've done this before. That's where you'll get to as you do this more and more, and you become cognizant of this process that you're going through over and over again as you achieve your goals and dreams and as you work to make the world a better place. And the quote for this section is from Jonas Salk. The reward for the work well done is the opportunity to do more. The cycle never ends. The hero goes through the journey once, comes back with the boon, and a lot of times goes right back into the cycle again. This is something that we'll go through in our entire lives. Let's have fun with it. Let's make the most of it. Let's live for creating a better life and a better world for ourselves, because this process done consciously can really do that. And then finally, these are 7 characteristics of what I call the hero within. And these are not Joseph Campbell. These are Ray Davis. I came up with these, 10 or 12 years ago, and had actually done another presentation around these. And I'll just really quick, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but I think these are really important. The hero's work may be great or small. It does not always change the world. Sometimes it just changes the moment. So this idea of seeing yourself as a hero does not mean that you're always saving the world from disaster. Sometimes you're a hero by just changing a moment, changing the vibration in a room, changing the dialogue on social media to something more positive. I mean, you can be a hero in a million ways. It doesn't always have to be big. Sometimes it might be, but sometimes it's little. The hero's work is everywhere he or she goes all day long. The hero is always looking for those phone booth moments to step forward and shine. Of course, a reference to Superman, right? The point is that we have opportunities all day long to answer the call to our herohood. It's not hubris. It's not egoic. It's just us stepping up to make the most of ourselves and a better world. And that's really what the hero's journey is about. I'm going to post this online, and I'll put a link below the video on this if you would like to have these and read. You can also find these on my blog in a couple of different places. I may post that link. That might be easier. But I would encourage you to go through these and see that you can be a hero every day. It doesn't require some big event or anything like that. Both the opportunities and the ability are there for you to be a hero every day in your life. So finally tonight, I want to thank you. I'm sorry again that we got started a little bit late. I hope that hearing the hero's journey, hearing about it or rehearing about it, maybe for the first time in a while, inspired you to think about ways in which you can be a hero in your everyday life and ways that you can answer the call to adventure. That big dream that you've had for a long time, those big goals that you want to see accomplished, that better world that you know is out there, and someone just needs to step up and help make it happen. All of those things happen when you answer your call to adventure, when you follow the hero's journey. So I want you to be thinking about some questions to think about as you leave tonight. How can you answer the call in your life right now? What are those specific ways that you can answer the call right now? I'll bet you there's 2 or 3 that come to mind right now. There's 2 or 3 goals, dreams, things that you're trying to do that come to your mind right now. Answer the call to adventure. Go for it. Give up the fears. Succeed or fail, it doesn't matter. You're on the hero's journey, and that will be worth its weight in gold just to go through that. What's holding you back? What are the things guarding your cave? Whatever they are, understand that you can get through that, and you can get back to the cave and find the reward that's yours for doing the hero's journey. Remember, too, that it's your own journey. Campbell was very clear about this. You're not on anyone else's journey. You're on your journey. And your journey has its own characteristics. It may follow this pattern. It may slightly follow this pattern. It might not follow this pattern at all. The key thing is to answer your call to adventures and go on those adventures and achieve the life that you seek. The next time we're together in a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about another topic related to personal development, and I haven't decided what that is yet, but I want to thank you all for spending some time with me tonight. I hope this was helpful. I am absolutely ready, willing, and able to answer any questions you might have about this. You can reach out to me at Affirmation Spot on Twitter. You can reach out to me facebook.com/affirmation spot, or on my website, affirmationspot.net. And I actually have quite a few resources around this topic that I would be happy to share with you. If you're interested in doing some more research, I can save you kind of going through the struggle of figuring out what all those resources are. Thank you so much for joining me on Excursions in the Mind, and thank you for staying home and coming with me. Everybody have a fantastic evening, and I will talk to you again soon.